In this video, I want to show you something fun you can do in Power BI. You can create a lollipop visual. And if you wonder what is exactly the business case for that, I'm still searching for it, but it is a very nice visual. And sometimes it's also about learning how to do certain things, and maybe the steps that you're taking to create this visual can help you creating another visual. And thinking about it, maybe the business case would be you want to show information, but it doesn't need to be exactly that information. You don't need the exact numbers. Then this could be a great way to show what's going on. And something I really like about this lollipop visual is that we can just create it with the core visuals, because this visual is actually a line chart. And I mean, that's awesome. I will show you how you can create that lollipop visual starting with this line chart. And we're going to do this together, and you can follow me step by step. And the only thing you need to recreate this together with me is you need a Power BI file and you need some data in it. And in my file on the x-axis we have the month, then I have a measure with some numbers in there on my y-axis, and I created a zero measure. I will show you how to do that. And I'm very curious about your experience creating this, but also maybe you have this use case that I have missed up until now. And I don't mean that in any negative way, because I think this is a fun visual. It makes me happy every time I look at it. Here we are in Power BI, and you can see, I will make this a little bit bigger. I have here a very basic line chart. We see the month and we see titles, and that's it. So the first thing I want to do is I give this a title, and that's just because I think that looks prettier than that standard title. So I give it a title, and I remove the titles from the X and Y axis. Also added some border here. So this is our starting point. And now, how can we create the lollipop chart? Because we want it to look like that, the lollipops. So how do we go from here to here? So first thing I'm doing, I'm going to the format pane. And what I'm going to do there is I go to markers and I say I want markers for all categories. So I turn them on. You see, I get these blue markers there. And now I make them pretty big for this example. I make them 9 and I choose like these little circles. And I say I want a border around it. And the color, for now I make it gray. And now we already have like the lolly of the lollipop. What we are going to do now is we go to the format pane and lines. And we can say here, lines apply settings to all, show for all series. We can turn it off. And what happens when I turn it off is the line disappears. So behavior as expected. Now we have all these circles. So how can I make this a lollipop? Now, there's this thing, it's called error bars, that we can use. And if I scroll down, we see error bars, and then I have to open options, and you see it's not enabled, but if I would enable it, I wouldn't see anything because we haven't defined the error bar. Let's disable this. I want the upper and the lower bound. The lower bound, that's what I told you that I created the zero measure before. So the zero measure, look at this, is a DAX measure that simply says 0 is 0. Why? I want the stick of the lollipop to start at 0. So I created that measure, and this will be my lower bound for the error bar. And then the upper bound will actually be the same measure that I have to create these markers in my line chart. And now I've added that and you see nothing. Why do you see nothing? You first have to enable. So now what we see is we have kind of the basics of our lollipop, but you see also at the bottom, we also see a little marker. We need to turn that off. So I do this. I turn that marker off. Because what you could do there is you could also add a marker there, and then you would have 2 markers. But for now, for the lollipop, that doesn't make sense. So I turn it off. And now I could say that the bar, like the stick of the lollipop, I want this to have a different width. These kind of things. Now, something that I did in my example was I went to y-axis and I disabled the values. So you also don't have the grid lines. And then I went down in the format pane again, went to data labels and turned them on. And I make sure the position is above, and I made them a little smaller. And something else you saw in my example was there was a reference line. We can do that by going to reference line. And I did something very simple. I put an average line for my measure and I made it gray and a little bit thinner and put it behind the visual. This could be any valuable information you need. And if you looked at my example, you saw that everything above a certain value was green. So above this line was green, and the others were gray, and the lowest was red. I want to show you how to do that, because if you go to your line, let's go up and then markers, you see you can't change the color here. So there's a little workaround what we need to do. What I'm going to do is I click on my visual, you see it's selected, and I go to clustered column chart. Doesn't look super pretty. Now this is a clustered column chart, and I go to columns here. And here I can use conditional formatting. And what I'm going to do first, I want to show you two things. First, I say my measure is bigger than 0% and smaller than 100%. I want it to be gray. So this means I want all my markers later on, and in this example, the columns to be gray. And everything that is 0%, I want to be red. And everything that is 100%, so the highest value, I want to be green, something like that. If this goes too fast for you, I have a video about how you can create highest and lowest value in Power BI. I will put a link somewhere in this video and also in the description, so have a look there, because this is a very simple trick how you can use conditional formatting for the highest and lowest value. When we do that now, and I click on OK, you see my columns here are changing. And what I do now again is I click on the visual, it's still selected, and I go back to line chart. Ta-da! So there we have now our lowest and highest value, because this is the workaround for using conditional formatting. If we go to the markers here, we still see they all show gray. And in my example, actually everything above this line was green. I show you how to do that. In my case, this line is like 50%. It's of the number. So what I do is, again, I go to my columns, conditional formatting, and here I say everything bigger than 50% and smaller than 100% is green. And if it is the lowest value, so 0%, I want it to be red. And put everything on percent. Let's do that. Okay. And now I go back to my line chart, and you see everything above the line is nicely colored, and everything below the line is gray, and the lowest value actually is red, like I said in my conditional formatting. So I hope this was not too fast. I will also put a step-by-step tutorial on my website about this. And I think this is just a really fun way to experiment with line visual and error bars and see what is possible. And it's good to know this functionality. So I hope this video helped you, and I'm very curious about your experience. So let me know in the comments.